International Court of Justice's ruling requiring Israel to stop acts of genocide in Gaza has prompted the UN Security Council to convene on Wednesday. Now, according to Palestine's UN ambassador, Riyad Mansour, the ruling sends a clear message that a ceasefire is necessary in order to carry out all of the orders made by the ICJ. Now, this decision continues to receive split reactions, some celebrating the ruling as a victory for the Palestinians, while others say the court avoided ordering a ceasefire. Joining me now to unpack this is Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, who is a former diplomat and dispute resolution expert with a focus on international relations. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Israel was ordered to prevent acts of genocide against Palestinians, but falling short of calling a ceasefire. What messages has this decision really sent out?
Good morning. There are people who are really confusing the findings of the ICJ at this stage. The ICJ at this stage was required to make an assessment as to whether there is a plausible allegations on genocide, and they made a determination that indeed a possibility exists that the genocide is being committed. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, that was requested was for the ICJ to give some level of protections to the Palestinians as a distinct group under the Genocide Act, which the court has done now. The court made a pronouncement that Israel must take all appropriate measures within its powers to protect the Palestinians against any act of genocide. That's crucial. However, the expectation that South Africa had that the ICJ must make pronouncement with respect to ceasefire was a genuine one, but the court did not make that assessment. A ceasefire is a very detailed, elaborate process that would have required certain measures to be put in place. It essentially means silencing of the guns, which the pronouncement was not made. But with working within the existing findings of the court to ensure that civilians are not continue to be harmed and genocide is not committed, I think the Security Council now is facing a daunting task. More so that the Americans have made a pronouncement to say the findings of the ICJ is consistent with what the Americans have been saying. Now it remains to be seen that this resolution will be developed in terms of the implementation. Because even within the framework of preventing acts of genocide, there's a lot of leeway that could be worked around to ensure that civilians are not in harm's way. And this is a total contrast with what the Americans are saying now. Because the Americans are speaking about minimum civilian casualties, which falls into this narrative of collateral damage that is accepted. Now, what is the threshold for minimum? The court did not make those determinations. The court wants a protection with immediate effect.
Yeah. In really looking at the reaction that we've received from the South African politicians, International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor. I mean, if I read the Sunday Times, she says that the court's decision amounts to ordering a ceasefire, asking the question, how do you provide aid and water without a ceasefire? And expanding to say that if you read the order by implication, a ceasefire must happen. So that in itself, just going around in circles on this word ceasefire, which was omitted. But how can aid and water be brought in without a ceasefire?
Well, the findings by the court so far makes no pronouncement on ceasefire. And I think we should be very clear about that so that the message is correctly communicated. A ceasefire, as I'm saying, is a distinct process with a lot of details that must be followed in terms of the confinement of combatants to particular zone, silencing of the guns. The court did not make that pronouncement. So the court implicitly has accepted that Israel can carry out certain operations, but in doing so, they must protect ordinary civilians and prevent acts of a genocide that include destructions of infrastructure and so on. So that's what the court's findings are. Now, whether the Israelis as the occupying power will be able to carry out the mandate of the court without a ceasefire, it's entirely upon them, because they are the occupying power, they are the occupying authority in that part of Palestine. They must put systems in place that will prevent the act of violence, still fulfill their mandate under international humanitarian law to provide, excuse me, those basic services to Palestinians.
So, you know, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the ICJ ruling and has said that what he will do is have his country continue to defend itself and its citizens while adhering to international laws. I mean, that response in itself doesn't necessarily come as a surprise. Where does it place this outcome?
The court has made a determination that within a month Israel must come and report to the court about systems and processes they've put in place to avoid acts of genocide, which is fundamentally what the South African case is based on, that there are possibility that genocide is being committed. So Israel will need to prove that they've put systems in place. It can be the usual way of conducting military operations. You would recall before these findings, Israel started talking about surgical operation and precision operations against Hamas. And I think it's implicit in the findings of the court that the Israelis have the right to defend themselves against any possible attack. But that right of self-defense, it falls flat to a large extent in terms of the occupying authority. How do you claim self-defense in occupying territory? Of course, there's been incursions into Israel. I think that they have the right to protect themselves against those kind of incursions. So it puts Israel in a very delicate position to walk this tightrope without continuing to do what they've been doing and putting systems in place to defend themselves, as they say. So the court has made an implicit decision that, of course, they can protect themselves, but the self-protection does not amount to collective punishment, which is the case that South Africa presented, to the destruction of infrastructure, a denial of basic medical services. So the court is quite implicit in terms of those issues.
Yeah,
and I think as they are quite huge. It will be unfortunate, I think, in my own view, if the Security Council debate now would add the question of ceasefire, because the Americans would veto it. Can the Security Council adopt this report as it is? I think it goes a long way. If they adopt that report, it will be important not to clutter it with issues that are not contained in the findings, because it will give pretext to the United States and United Kingdom to veto the resolution.
Yeah, I mean, the UN Security Council sitting on Wednesday sits with a daunting task, I suppose, as they try and, want to give this binding effect on the pronouncement of the ICJ on those provisional measures. What are some of the considerations that will need to be made in this work? I mean, this meeting was called by Algeria.
Paul, what will be required, the ICJ, Paul, what will be required is to work out, the Security Council can pass an addendum resolution that will support the implementation of this court judgment. I mean, to prevent acts of violence will require very detailed, elaborate systems and processes that the Security Council can impose to ensure that does not happen. So I think working within the flexibility of the court judgment, there's a lot that can be achieved. The unfortunate thing would be to bring elements that are not related to this, an interpretation that says, well, you can't do this, Israel cannot implement this without ceasefire, because that's not what the court has made a judgment about. And that will give a pretext for the veto. It will prolong the challenges in Gaza and the rest of other part of Palestine. It would be unfortunate if that was to be brought in here.
So if there are any challenges in terms of the implementation, what are the other options that can be looked at? I know that Justice Minister Ronald Lamola has said that this ruling is a good foundation for the ICC to start to consider the individuals involved in what's happening in Gaza.
You know, this process is distinct. The ICJ is distinct from the ICC. The ICC
Yes.
will conduct its own investigation without being influenced by the findings of the ICJ, because these are totally distinct processes. However, the ICJ has made pronouncements in terms of comments that were made by senior Israeli government, including the Defense Minister Galad and the current Foreign Minister, who was the Minister of Energy, and even the President of Israel. So they made really fundamental findings that can hold those individuals accountable. And I think the ICC should work within the framework of what they are required to do without being influenced by this process. It will be very important to do that moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And weighing in on this discussion is former Ambassador, dispute resolution expert, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. The UN Security Council is set to discuss the ICJ ruling come Wednesday. We thank you for your time.